I take you back to your own childhood, do you remember the occasion when you first felt consciousness of your own individual self?
That was in my 11th year. There I suddenly, on my way to school, I stepped out of a mist. It was just as if I had been in a mist, walking in a mist, and I stepped out of it and I knew I am. I am what I am. And then I thought, but what have I been before? And then I found that I had been in a mist.
Buscando entender a mente humana, Carl Jung precisou atravessar a própria. Antes de falar sobre sombras, ele precisou encará-las. E ao tentar explicar o inconsciente, foi engolido por ele. Jung não só estudou o abismo de forma analítica, como psiquiatra e psicoterapeuta. Ele desceu até ele como paciente, como cobaia da própria experiência. E hoje, acompanharemos essa fascinante jornada e no final desse vídeo, descobriremos no que ela resultou. Desde muito jovem, Jung sentia que vivia entre dois mundos. Um mundo racional, científico e organizado, e outro, feito de sonhos, símbolos, forças antigas. Sentia-se sempre incompleto, dividido. E por muito tempo, acreditou que a razão daria conta de tudo, que a mente podia ser entendida, explicada e controlada. Foi quando conheceu Freud, e por um tempo, acreditou ter encontrado um norte, um pai intelectual.
Oh, well, I just paid a visit to him in Vienna, and then we talked for 13 hours without interruption.
13 hours
For 13 hours without interruption. We didn't realize that we were almost dead at the end of it, but it was tremendously interesting. He was the old man and had a great experience, and he was, of course, way ahead of me, and so I settled down to learn something first.
Mas algo dentro dele não cabia naquela estrutura teórica. Jung percebia que o homem moderno tinha se afastado dos seus símbolos, dos seus mitos e da sua alma. E isso gerava um vazio silencioso.
I would say that a civilization needs a myth to live. We know that if missionaries destroy the myth of a primitive people, they destroy them also physically. They begin to drink, they degenerate, they are lost. And no civilization can live only from welfare. It needs a myth to live. All great civilizations, when they were flourishing, had a living myth.
A man is not complete when he lives in a world of statistical truth. He must live in a world of his biological truth. Man has always lived in the myth. And we think we are able to be born today and to live in no myth, without history. That is a disease. That's absolutely abnormal, because man is not born every day. He's once born in a specific historical setting with the specific historical qualities, and therefore he is only complete when he has a relation to these things. It's just as if you were born without eyes and ears, when you are growing up with no connection with the past. From the standpoint of natural science, you need no connection with the past. You can wipe it out.
Yes.
And that is a mutilation of the human being.
Então acontece a ruptura.
I had had written that book that cost me my friendship with Freud because he couldn't accept it.
Yes.
To him, the unconscious was a product of consciousness.
Yes.
And it simply contained the remnants. I mean, it was a sort of storeroom where all the discarded things of consciousness were heaped up and left. But to me, the unconscious then was already a matrix, a sort of consciousness of a creative nature, namely capable of autonomous acts, autonomous intrusions into consciousness.
Ele se afasta de Freud, perde sua posição no mundo acadêmico, seu reconhecimento, o ego se quebra, e é nesse momento que o abismo se abre. Mas em vez de fugir, ele fez algo que pouquíssimas pessoas teriam coragem de fazer. Decidiu descer voluntariamente ao próprio inconsciente. Não por curiosidade, mas por necessidade. Registrar seus próprios delírios. Sonhava com dilúvios, deuses antigos, imagens que não vinham da sua história pessoal. Era como se algo falasse dentro dele, numa linguagem mais antiga que a própria ciência. Jung começa a ter visões acordado. Cidades submersas, sangue, figuras míticas. Dessa travessia nasce o Livro Vermelho, não como obra científica, mas como diário de alguém atravessando o próprio inferno interior. Jung não estava estudando a mente, estava sendo transformado por ela. E é nesse mergulho que ele entende algo fundamental. O inconsciente não é um porão caótico. É um universo vivo, habitado por arquétipos. Padrões que moldam a alma humana desde o início dos tempos. Ali ele percebe. A consciência é só uma pequena ilha, cercada por um oceano imenso.
I never could claim that any kind of human work could reveal something about the nature of God or about his existence. I only know that the idea of God is a pattern, an age-old pattern, a primitive pattern that always has been and never lost its, what we call, luminosity. It is always there and it still plays the same role as it always did. We can establish the existence of that pattern, and that is for our practical purposes enough. Because when we can integrate such an idea in our mind, the idea of such a being, then that gives an entirely different scope to things.
Descer ao inconsciente não era loucura. Era iniciação. Era morte simbólica, mas também renascimento. Nessa expedição ao abismo nasceram seus maiores conceitos: a sombra, a persona, os arquétipos, o self e a individuação. Toda essa magnífica obra foi resultado de uma única decisão: não fugir de si mesmo, não temer a própria escuridão. Como ele próprio disse, não se alcança a luz imaginando figuras luminosas, mas tornando consciente a escuridão. E para compreender essa psicologia, é preciso conhecer melhor o homem por trás dela. Relatos de alunos, pacientes e colegas descrevem Carl Jung como uma presença intensa, erudita, profundamente lúcida, mas habitada por um mundo interior vasto e inquietante. Em suas conferências, ele falava como alguém que havia vivido o suficiente para reconhecer os limites da razão e a profundidade do inconsciente. Mesmo diante de mentes críticas, céticas, treinadas para duvidar, ele não tentava impressionar. Seu objetivo era oferecer algo que fosse útil ao ser humano. Para ele, psicologia não era apenas ciência, era vivência, sobrevivência interior.
I met him when I was 18, and I began in the year 1834, I began analysis with him. We went out there to the tower, and out of the bushes suddenly we were standing around kind of, awkwardly as one does, not knowing what was going to happen. And then out of the bushes came a man, and I was deeply impressed by him. I thought naturally he was a Methuselah, because when you are 18 you think a 58-year-old is a ready for the cemetery. He told that story, which you can read in the memories, about this girl who was on the moon and had to fight a demon, and the black demon got her. And he pretended, he told it in a way as if she really had been on the moon and it had happened. And I was very rationalistically trained from school, so I said indignantly, but she imagined to be on the moon, or she dreamt it, but she wasn't on the moon. And he looked at me earnestly and said, yes, she was on the moon. I still remember looking over the lake there and thinking, and either this man is crazy or I am too stupid to understand what he means. And then suddenly it dawned on me, he means that what happens psychically is the real reality. And this other moon, this stony desert which goes around the earth, that's illusion, or that's only pseudo-reality. And that hit me tremendously deeply. When I crawled rather drunk into bed because he gave us a lot of burgundy, that evening I thought it will take you 10 years to digest what you experience today.
When you met him in the club, or when you met him privately or in analysis, it was always a man interested in I would like to use the word, in the supernatural food. Always. And to the depths. And you see, you could come into his room in analysis, and he was just speaking about the dreams you had had before, last night, not knowing them, but he was involved. He was so transparent for people. And that was a fascinating thing in the relationship with Jung. Therefore, everybody who knew Jung had the feeling he speaks one's own language. Freud always wanted to break a transference and to
resolve it
and to bring people to life again, down to the adaptation to life again. But Jung had another point of view, had the feeling as long as we have a strong transference, one must serve it, because he said there is a greater personality involved in transference. And we don't know what this greater personality has in storage, and so we must serve it. And that was tremendously difficult for Jung. He often told us, you see, I should have 10 lives in order really to follow the development of the individuation process so deeply as he did with us all.
Yes.
But that was also what interested him. He many times said, without you women, I couldn't have developed my psychology.
Now, Jung worked in this rejected feminine world of the unconscious for years. People came to him. He was particularly successful with women patients. And one person came into his life very early on because he's already with Jung and Emma Jung at the famous conference in Vienna where they are all photographed together. And that is Tony Wolff.
Well, all I can say is that, of course, she was a most extraordinary person. There's no doubt about that. And she was a great help to Jung, too. I mean, when it comes to psychological types, for instance, she played a very important part there.
In his development of his ideas.
He had all his knowledge in philosophy and so on and so forth. She had been one of his patients to begin with.
I see.
Oh, yeah. And I remember very well, he was very proud on the fact that he had succeeded in curing her.
A lot of people who knew her said that they despaired of her ever recovering from whatever her psychological disturbance was. I think one must accept that it was profound enough to fit the rare, exceptional spirit that she was, because in a sense, the rarer, the more exceptional the spirit, the deeper the psychological suffering. And Jung managed to bring her out of this, so that by the time of the famous Vienna conference, she was already an integrated working personality. And to me, that photograph is very moving, because the one who looks young, as if she's just been born, is Tony Wolff. She sits there with these large eyes. Jung had an instinct that what was wrong with life, what made life tear apart, made it incomplete, was because the feminine was rejected, driven insane, driven mad by a world of men, rejected by a masculine-dominated world. And that time when he let himself go, and when he landed deep down in what he came to call the collective unconscious, all of this, the rejected feminine in himself, confronted him.
Tony Wolff was being analyzed by Jung. When Jung started to have his active imagination, it really got going and he got rather unstable. And Tony Wolff simply said that she wasn't going to go on with her analysis with him and that she was going to have a relationship with him. And more or less, I gather, took him by the ear and did so.
In this unfamiliar, terrifying underground of the collective unconscious, she was Jung's guide, to such an extent that she lived with him. And she took over the whole of the burden. And of course, the tensions caused by that in Zurich and in the family must have been tremendous.
She reflected his anima in the way that Mrs. Jung didn't.
It was she who introduced him to all the Eastern things, Eastern spirituality, Eastern philosophy, and so on.
They were lovers, I take it?
Oh, yes.
Yes. Emma knew of their relationship, but she didn't wish to divorce you.
Oh, good gracious, no. It would never have entered her head.
No, I see.
I mean, that wouldn't have been done. I mean,
that's rather unusual.
No, I don't think so. Not at that time. I mean, I don't even think nowadays. I mean, she had 4 children, and I don't think that Jung would have wanted a divorce at all.
Well, perhaps this isn't really relevant, but not many women will countenance open infidelity.
Please forgive me. I am not so sure if that is not a kind of British, maybe even English prejudice, conditioning, or something. I think that...
I think it's an American one, too.
Is it?
Without Tony Wolff, he couldn't have made it, because she had breaks in a way. And she was stopping him always when he had a temperament where he was losing himself completely and without boundaries. And Tony Wolff stopped him and always brought him back to reality. And that was tremendously important for him.
Was she originally a patient?
And she also understood him.
Yes.
She had such a bright mind that she grasped it even before he understood it. And she was also really furthering his intuition very much. Because at that time he was also, he was a medical doctor. He had worked at the asylum of Burkölzli, and he was very intellectual until really he came to know her.
That was the point. There was nothing shadowy, no shadow. And Jung wanted to be and tried to be as conventional as possible, wherever possible. So that in the inner world, and his relationships with both women, he could be as unconventional as he really was, as unique as he really was. Yeah, it was quite a thing for him to do around 1910. The Victorian age wasn't quite so far gone, and it wasn't anything he hid. I remember I was walking in Zurich, there near the Institute, and there was Jung and Tony Wolff walking. There was nothing hiding. And it was in this relationship that he had these tremendous experiences of the conjunction. It's when he understood the mystical background of sexuality. Mystical, the psychological archetype that was working there.
That was later such an established relationship, and Mrs. Jung was so imploded that I am very sure he would not have parked his car in front of Tony Wolff's house, who was 1 minute away from the Institute, and everybody would know when he was there and when he was not there, if he would have had his slightest doubts about it.
And so this relationship with Tony Wolff was not an affair, it was another wife.
2 wives and 1 man. That's an excuse. My opinion is he should, as CG, he should know earlier that was his animal, and so come to stop.
One day, Mrs. Jung approached me and said, "Would you please cooperate analytically with me and Tony Wolff?" So we did a threesome analysis for quite a long period of time.
Oh.
Yeah, that was very funny.
I see. Mutual dreams or just Jung's dreams?
No Jung's dreams. Mrs. Jung's dreams and Tony's dreams and my dream.
Oh, all 3?
Yeah.
I see. And you found this very helpful?
It was interesting.
Right, very interesting.
She wasn't at all browbeaten by Jung. She was downright and direct, and she did a lot of work on his papers, too. She obviously stood by Jung all through these periods of crisis. She was a much more solid sort of character than Jung.
First, she had given birth to 5 children. And then Jung told us, and she told us, and she felt the need also to know more. And then she studied physics and mathematics and many other things. And then she had an analysis with her own husband.
She did?
Yes.
How difficult.
Yes. She had also another analysis, but the main thing was analysis with Jung. And afterwards, he allowed her to analyze. And she was a very good analyst, and the opposite of her husband. He was more intuition and thinking, and Emma Jung was sensation, mainly sensation, absolutely down to the earth, and more to that, to the depths of the earth.
Mrs. Jung had a fantastic sense of humor. She giggled and laughed, and she was very, very nice woman. Motherly, but I think she helped a lot in working out, let's say, the animus anima problem. It's those three who did the work, I think.
Emma Jung said to a close friend of mine just before she died that she had never ceased to be grateful in her life for Tony Wolff, because Tony Wolff was able to do for her husband something that she could not have done.
I think what's remarkable is that they made it. And I think they're the ones, that Tony and Emma are the ones that made the threesome situation possible. They worked out something between them.
Jung, in his dedication copy of Answer to Job, wrote, well, I have to translate it, unasked dropped from heaven. Ungefragt vom Himmel gefallen. So, no, I think naturally the relationship changed, the relationship do change. But
talking, and I went home with him afterwards, and to Mrs. Jung's despair, we sat talking until about 3 o'clock in the morning without break. And again, I had this very strange feeling, although it was snowing outside, bitterly cold, that I was sitting around one of the first fires in a camp somewhere in the bush in Africa, talking, as you can only talk in those conditions. And I said to him, why don't you come back to Africa with me? He said, you know, when I came back from Mount Elgon and from Kenya and living amongst the witch doctors of Africa, he said, I found so much witchcraft in Switzerland. I felt that I had to deal with all this witchcraft first before I could, before I could travel again. And he used to refer to himself as an old witch doctor. Very often when people asked him, are you a Protestant? Are you a Catholic? He said, don't ask me these questions. He said, you know, I'm only an old African who finds his God in his dreams. And he really meant that. He really meant that. We had this tremendous human, almost animal warmth and immediacy. It was the immediacy of the laugh that got me. This feeling that he had, that if man lived his life religiously, if he lived his life symbolically, then it was almost as if what the theologians called God, and my Zulus called Nkulu, the first spirit, where the first spirit had passed over some of his power and some of his responsibilities to the human being, and that the human being had a God-like task to perform in creation, and the extent to which he performed it, he derived his meaning. It's a very important part of Jung's thinking.
I remember once a patient wanted to marry Jung. She was convinced that he was the man for her and for her lifetime. In vain, Jung explained to her that he already was married. She continued to be convinced, and therefore Jung accepted. She went on, prepared a marriage deal, had printed cards, everything was ready. Jung continued to accept in full confidence of unconscious reactions coming from the patients or from him. And the day before the planned marriage, he got an express letter from the patient telling him that this night God had told her that unhappily enough the marriage would not be possible. The patient came out of her psychosis, had always in her memory this event, and was completely balanced afterwards. That's how Jung handles the transference situation as a full reality and having fully confidence in the unconscious, which would lead the patient and himself through the seemingly difficult situation.
He could see what every woman was really substantially like and helped her to find her main interest, literature, politics, psychotherapy, or astrology, or what you want. He had an art to follow a person until she found herself. And the value of transference was great for Jung himself.
It really was as if he was always inside of your unconscious and not trespassing, but because he has been wherever one was, and so he knew how to be there. He also would never use any of his terms, ever. My last interview, I told him a dream, and I realized, my God, that man is 85 years old. And it was pages of dream, and so I only told him half the dream, thinking I can't put that all on him. And so then he started. You know, he didn't ask you for one association, very seldom he did. He just started to talk. And I was kind of not making the connection, which what he was talking about had anything to do with my dream, but I knew better that I will find the connection if I listen eventually. And suddenly he said, oh, that is as if you dream. And he told me the second part of my dream, which I hadn't told him.
After about 2 years, I had a dream in which Jung had died. And I was in his house in the antechamber where he was laid up. And I paced up the room, very depressed, very unhappy. And suddenly my feeling changed, as if I pulled up my socks and, well, all right, he's dead now, as far as the gone had worked. I told Jung that dream, and he said, well, all right, now you can see patients. You're ready to see patients.
One didn't see it, but one felt it, that a ray of his spirit was falling onto us. And one was terribly spoiled because compared with this, as a man, we are no more so interesting.
Yes, that must have been a problem. And
I must say, besides one's own husband.
Well, you were married. And
I was married. Yeah.
You had a deep relationship. And how did your husband feel? Did he ever feel jealous of you?
Clear. All our husbands, the husbands of our the women around, were very jealous.
Yes.
But since then you understand that Jung was not falling into the traps and wishes of the women, so they had not to be really jealous.
Nice.
Because Jung never misused his position and all these transferences.
Greeks called techne, hence our word technology and so on. And techne means also art and skill. He lived his sensation, I think, in its natural state, and therefore it was very creative. He looked at the wall in his last years. You see the irregularities of the stone would create that picture, and then he would carve it out.
The statements of every religion, of many poets and so on, are statements about the inner mythological process, which is a necessity because man is not complete. If he is not conscious of that aspect of things.
Well, we have to revive primitive superstition. Because in primitive people, their sword has a soul, their hammer has a soul. No smith would start making a sword without a ritual first. Still in the Middle Ages, the heroes who depended on their sword, think if your sword breaks in battle, you are a dead man. So their sword had a name and a soul. They knew that sword, and the solidity of that sword was their fate. And now it's still so. Let a few of your atomic plants explode, and please. Matter, if it has to cooperate with you, needs loving care. And not only technically by oiling and so on. You have to kind of live with it. Otherwise it plays you tricks. If you notice, it's highly symbolic. The days you can't open a door, you can't get at something, or some object hides from you just when generally when you are not in yourself and in an impatient mood or so on, then everything plays you tricks. It's naturally your own unconscious mixed up with it. But it communicates with matter.
We are only deeply unconscious of these facts because we live all by our senses and outside of ourselves. If a man could look into it himself, he would discover it. Yes. And when a man discovers it, in our days, he thinks he's crazy. And he may be crazy.
He played a lot along the lake, and he did it very often alone. He took always a little shovel, removed the sand, and then played with little rivers and so on. And he said when he was 83, he said one day when we were playing, I was generally watching him, playing a bit with him. And he said to me, you know, only today I have suddenly thought, what am I doing when I'm playing like that? That's what I have done all my life, digging out springs. He was just enjoying that. He called it the waterworks. And always before he was writing, he did some days or even weeks of waterworks till he was in the right mood, and then he began writing. I sat sometimes for hours beside him, just watching, not talking. Once an old peasant went along and said to me, isn't this Professor Jung not a world-famous man? And I said, yes. He is, and he said, wouldn't think it if you see him like that.
I have the feeling I am able to help this thing which guides my life. I am not doing it, but I can help him in some way. And that's something which probably Jung has invoked in me. Your good ideas are not produced by your will. It comes to you. You must make yourself ready. I think that's all. You must have a certain amount of interest, and that's also when you have a difficulty in yourself. You must be interested. You must get the answers from somewhere. You can't produce it yourself. You can't calculate it, and it must. At least most of the important things come from somewhere, and the rest you can then afterwards work out by a kind of technique or routine and so on. But you can't do everything with routine.
I was always looking for something in between, you know, something that linked that remote past with the present moment. And I found, to my amazement, it is alchemy. It is the basis of our modern way of conceiving things. And therefore, it is as if it were right under the threshold of consciousness. Gives a wonderful picture of how the development of archetypes, that means the movement of archetypes, looks when you look upon them as a form of evolve, namely from today you look back into the past and you see how the present moment has evolved out of the past. And we can construct or even predict our the cultures of our days when we know what it has been yesterday.
And when I heard Jung talking about alchemy, it was like a revelation for me to see how, because there are religious ideas which are on the foundation of all these scientific work. The energy that you do, that you start to do chemistry, comes from somewhere which is not a really rational thing. It's an emotional thing.
For Jung, religion was an attitude. For Jung, religion was an attitude to life and had absolutely nothing whatever to do with any kind of creed. And he was actually ambivalent about creeds, because on the one hand he said that a creed would stop you from having an experience, and since he believed that religion was not only an attitude but had to do with experience, personal experience, if you block it by a creed, obviously you can't have an experience. But at the same time, he also thought that a creed might be a tremendously important framework for someone whose ego was too weak to stand the horror, the void of complete loneliness.
He was always saying, why don't the priests go down with me into the collective, into the unconscious of modern man, to learn what the modern soul is about before they start to cure it, because nobody would look at the soul of man in a modern way. They all behaved, as I said before, as if creation was accomplished, if the soul was an accomplished fact. And it wasn't. That's why the book of Revelations had so much meaning to Jung. And that's why he saw it having its place in the Bible. You know, Calvin fought very desperately to have the book of Revelation removed from the Bible, because he calls it a dark and dangerously obscure book. But it really is very meaningful, because it's the one book which suggests that the revelation of God doesn't end with the coming of Christ. There is more to come. That religion is a process of continuing revelation and experiencing of revelation and being obedient to your greater awareness of becoming in life.
He was very conscious of the center of his being, which he called the self. And he would talk about the God image living, being alive in this center of our whole being. He always said he did not wish to discuss the existence of God, because this was a metaphysical question which he was not prepared to go into. But from the psychological point of view, he knew that the God image was within oneself. The God image changes. God does not change.
Relatou que em meio ao caos do abismo, no coração de suas visões, mandalas surgiam espontaneamente. E que na clínica, em momentos de crise profunda, seus pacientes desenhavam mandalas sem saber por quê. Era a psique tentando se curar, tentando reencontrar seu eixo. Para Jung, A mandala é o símbolo do centro, do self, e ela revela uma verdade arquétipica de que existe em todo ser humano um impulso em direção à totalidade, um chamado interior para se tornar aquilo que se é. Na linguagem junguiana, essa força se chama individuação, o lugar onde os opostos se reconciliam, onde luz e sombra deixam de lutar. Inconsciente e consciência se encontram. A jornada de se tornar quem você realmente é.
I had a case that was an intelligent young woman. She was a student of philosophy, very good mind, where one could expect easily that she would see that I am not the parental authority. But she was utterly unable to get out of this delusion. And in such a case, one always has recourse to the dreams. It is just as if one would ask the unconscious, now what do you say to such a condition? You see, she says with the unconscious, of course I know you are not my father, but I just feel like that. It is like that. I depend upon you. And I say, now you see what the unconscious says. Now the unconscious produces dreams in which I really assumed a very curious role. You know, she was the little infant. She was sitting on my knees. I held her in my arms. I was a very tender father to the little girl, you know. And more, her dreams became emphatic in that respect. Namely, that I was a sort of giant, and she is a very little, frail human thing, you know, and quite a little girl in the hands of an enormous being. And the last dream of that series was, I cannot tell you all the dreams, was that I was out in nature. I stood in a field of wheat, an enormous field of wheat that was ripe for harvest. And I was a giant. And I held her in my arm like a baby. And the wind was blowing over that field of wheat. Now, you know, when the wind is blowing over wheat field, these waves in the wheat field. Yes. And with these waves, I swayed like that, putting her as if it were to sleep, you know. And she felt as being in the arms of a god, of the Godhead. Mm-hmm. And I thought, now the harvest is ripe. Yes. And I must tell her. And I told her, you see, what you want and what you project into me, because you are not conscious of it, is you have the idea of a deity you don't possess. Therefore, you see it in me. Yeah. That clicked. She suddenly became aware of an entirely heathenish image. Yes. That comes fresh from the archetype. She had not the idea of a Christian God or of an Old Testament Yahweh. It was a heathenish God, you see, a God of nature, of vegetation. He was the wheat himself. He is the spirit of the wheat, the spirit of the wind. And she was in the arms of that Newman. No. Now, that is the living experience of an archetype. Now, that made a tremendous impression upon that girl, and instantly it clicked. She saw what she really was missing, that missing value, that was in the form of a projection in myself and made myself indispensable to her. Yes. And then she saw it is not indispensable, because it is, as the dream says, she is in the arms of that archetypal idea. Now that is a luminous experience, you see. And that is the thing that people are looking for. Yeah, an archetypal experience that gives them an incorruptible value. You see, they depend upon other conditions. They depend upon their desires, their ambitions, depend upon other people, because they have no value in themselves. They have nothing in themselves. They are only rational, and they are not in the possession of a treasure that would make them independent. But when that girl can hold that experience, then she doesn't depend anymore. She cannot depend anymore because that value is in herself. And that is a sort of liberation. Yeah? And that is, of course, makes her complete, you know. In as much as she can realize such a luminous experience, she is able to continue her path, her way, her individuation. The acorn can become an oak and not a donkey.
O abismo não é só destruição. Ele também é matriz. Ele não só dissolve, ele reorganiza. Descer ao inconsciente não é se perder, é se aproximar do centro. Como nos mitos, o herói desce ao mundo subterrâneo, enfrenta monstros, encara a sombra e volta transformado. Carl Jung não estudou esse mito, ele o viveu. Seu mergulho no inconsciente foi a descida ao caos primordial, e através dele se tornou mestre, o pai da psicologia analítica. E mesmo tendo percorrido as profundezas do abismo, encontrou sua totalidade, porque teve coragem de permanecer nele tempo suficiente para compreendê-lo.
Man's soul is a complicated thing, and it takes sometimes half a lifetime to get somewhere in one's psychological development. You know, it is by no means always a matter of psychotherapy or treatment of neuroses. It is all psychology has also the aspect of a pedagogical method in the widest sense of the word. It is something. It is an education. It is something like antique philosophy, and not what we understand by a technique. It is something that touches upon the whole of man, and which challenges also the whole of man, in the patient or whatever the receiving part is, as well as in the doctor. It is a regular observation that when you talk to an individual, and this individual gives you insight into its inner preoccupations, interests, emotions, in other words, hands over his personal complexes, then you get slowly and nilly-willy into the situation of a sort of authority. Yeah. You become a point of reference. You know you are in possession of all the important items in a person's development. Now you see, that creates an emotional relationship to the analyst, and that is what Freud called the transference. Yes, which is a central problem of analytic psychology. It is just so as if these people had handed out their whole existence And that can have very peculiar effects upon the individual. Either they hate you for it or they love you for it, but you are not indifferent to them.
Talvez toda jornada de autoconhecimento seja isso: parar de fugir de si mesmo e ter coragem de descer rumo ao próprio desconhecido.
When I saw him last, he had also a vision while I was with him, but there he said, I see enormous stretches, devastated, enormous stretches of the earth. But thank God it's not the whole planet. I think that if not more people try to reflect and take back their projections and take the opposites within themselves, there will be a total destruction. There are a lot of people who go through life and the unconscious is no reality to them. They say at breakfast I had a funny dream, and in the afternoon they don't know anything about it. But if they paint them and interpret them and think about them, the dream becomes real. And that's why you have to be lonely, so that the unconscious becomes stronger. It's like loading up the unconscious, and then it manifests. Hermes Trismegistus said in one active imagination to an alchemist, I am the friend of whoever is lonely. We have now, you see, it's a man who pours water into the fish. Now the fish is the unconscious, the content. So we have to support the unconscious. It's not enough to just have it. We have to actively turn towards it and support it so that it then helps us. There are many people who are not in analysis, but if they are naturally gifted, which I would call if they are honest, they can find these things without analysis. I've lived in this tower sometimes 3 weeks alone without speaking to one word to anybody. And I sometimes thought I was going off my head. But the unconscious became alive. It was my part.
There are no other similar beings like man that are articulate and could give account of their functioning. So you see, it is demonstrated to us in our days what the power of the psyche is of man, how important it is to know something about it, but we know nothing about it. Nobody would give credit to the idea that the psychical processes of the ordinary man have any importance whatever. One thinks, oh, he has just what he has in his head. It is all from his surrounding. He's taught such a thing, believes such a thing. And particularly if he's well housed and well fed, then he has no idea of it. That's the great mistake. Because he is just that as which he is born, and he is not born as tabula rasa, but as a reality.